Tonight, the unemployment rate hits its highest level in a generation, leading job seekers to take desperate measures.
I've applied for hundreds of jobs, literally, and I've had 3 interviews since December.
I'm Jeff Glor. Also tonight, caught in the crossfire. At a time when the U.S. is trying to win over the Afghan people, an American airstrike kills dozens of civilians. Conservative outrage, the uproar after a presidential advisor attacks Republicans. And he went online to find new parents. What he found was so much more. That is tonight's Assignment America.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening. Katie's off tonight. As we begin Labor Day weekend, another reminder this evening that America's workforce is still struggling. Today, the government reported the August unemployment rate hit 9.7%, a rise of 0.3 of a point, and the highest rate since 1983. Another 216,000 jobs disappeared last month. Not a pretty picture. But as Anthony Mason reports tonight, there are some signs that things may be starting to turn around.
For the 20th straight month, the U.S. economy lost jobs in August, but the pace of those losses continues to slow.
The job market is on the mend. It's going to be a long, painful recovery, but we're headed in the right direction.
After the credit crisis erupted last September, monthly job losses quickly deepened, hitting a low of more than 700,000 in January. They've now returned to levels before the panic, and the government says a third of the industries in the country are hiring. This California furniture maker laid off all 7 of its employees at the bottom of the recession.
And we had to drop our staff just down to me.
Owner Cliff Spencer was left alone to do the carpentry, while his wife Lee took over the bookkeeping. But business is beginning to turn around.
07 and 08 were not profitable years, and it looks like this year will be profitable.
So the Spencers have brought back 2 of their workers.
There's more work going on. Contractors are getting busier again. So it's lifting.
But the job market differs sharply depending where you live. In Washington, D.C., where the government is hiring, for every unemployed worker, there's 1 job posting. But in Houston, that ratio jumps to 4 to 1. In Los Angeles, it's 8 to 1. In Detroit, the worst hit city in the country, there are 18 people looking for work for every job listing.
I've applied for hundreds of jobs, literally, and I've had 3 interviews since December.
Jonathan Colby was laid off from his job as an architectural projects manager in Florida 8 months ago. He now sends out resumes with a Dunkin' Donuts gift card for prospective employers and is offering a small video camera to anyone who helps him land a job.
Yes, it is cheesy and it is gimmicky, but it gets people's attention.
Whatever it takes. Jonathan is one of 5 million Americans who have now been out of work 6 months or more. And that's about 1/3 of those who are unemployed. Jeff?
And Anthony, for people like Jonathan and more, this is not just fewer people working, but those who are working less hours.
Yeah, the average work week is now a little over 33 hours, and it's, close to a record low. That's significant because when business does pick up for employers, they're likely to extend those hours for the workers they do have before they start hiring more people.
All right, Anthony Mason tonight. Anthony, thank you. Almost all employers are looking to cut costs, and that includes state governments. Many are taking the drastic step now of closing down these days. 20 states have started or proposed unpaid days off for workers, with 4 states closed for business today. Not exactly the holiday that state workers were hoping for. The state motto of Rhode Island is the word hope. But right now, what they need is help.
Every business I know is trying to be smarter about how they spend money. They expect their government to do the same thing.
With an unemployment rate of 12.7% and income tax and sales tax revenues plummeting, Rhode Island Governor Don Carcieri says he has to shut down the government for a total of 12 days over the next year, which will save the state about $17.3 million. But for workers, it's effectively a 4.6% pay cut.
This is not funny. It really isn't. This is my job and I need it.
Only 10 state agencies will not close, those employing essential workers like firefighters, police officers, and prison guards. Other states hurting.
Oh my God, I can't register my car today.
In California, you can't renew your driver's license. In Georgia, 25,000 are being furloughed, including the Consumer Complaint Hotline. And in Maine, families can't apply for food stamps or Medicaid. You feel like you made the concessions you were supposed to make.
That's right.
In Rhode Island, J. Michael Downey represents 4,000 state employees, some making as little as $18,000 a year. And he's joined a lawsuit stopping the furlough for now.
They've done everything they can do, and we have every time called on, we've answered the governor's problems. We can't answer them this time. It can't be on the back of state employees all the time.
Forced by the legislature to trim $68 million in all from his budget, Kachiri sees no choice.
We're going through a tough time. This is a tough time, but I think like anything else in life, you manage your way through.
Governor Kachiri says if the court doesn't allow his furlough, he may be forced to lay off 1,000 state workers. To the war in Afghanistan now. U.S. and NATO forces are under strict orders to keep civilian casualties to a minimum. But today, more than 70 people were killed during an American airstrike, many of them civilians. Elizabeth Palmer reports the U.S. pilot fired on 2 fuel trucks that had been hijacked by the Taliban.
The burned wreckage of the fuel tankers sits on the riverbank, next to a missile crater and charred gun fragments. But it's hard to know how many of those killed here were Taliban fighters targeted by NATO.
Insurgents were positively identified.
And how many were civilians, because all the bodies already lie in a mass grave. The strike took place in Kunduz, an area under German command. Early on Friday morning, 2 fuel trucks stolen by a group of Taliban were reported stranded by the river. The German NATO troops called in a U.S. airstrike. But witnesses say by then local civilians had arrived hoping to siphon off some of the stolen fuel. They were either killed on the spot or ended up in the hospital with serious burns. By day's end, NATO's chief admitted there was cause for concern.
The Afghan people should know that we are deeply committed to protecting them and that we will fully and immediately investigate.
Whatever the investigation reveals, today's airstrike puts extra pressure on America's top commander in Afghanistan. General Stanley McChrystal has made reducing civilian casualties central to his military strategy. Defense Secretary Robert Gates also knows that every incident like this undermines America's larger mission.
Is there a tipping point where the Afghans begin to see us as part of the problem, a part of their problem, rather than part of their solution?
A solution that, after today's airstrike, looks even more difficult. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, London.
Back home now, President Obama plans to make a televised speech to America's school children next Tuesday about the importance of education and staying in school. But some critics believe the president will use that speech to promote his political agenda. And some school officials said today they will not let students watch it. In Fort Worth, Texas, about a third of schools will not show it. Albuquerque, New Mexico schools will let students opt out of watching. And in Green Bay, Wisconsin, they'll record the speech and let teachers decide later if it's appropriate. We want to talk about this now with Bob Schieffer, CBS News' chief Washington correspondent and host of Face the Nation. We'll get this one right, Bob. Bob, we should mention other presidents, including Ronald Reagan and the first President Bush, have delivered similar speeches to students. Why is this speech in particular causing such a controversy?
Well, it has really stirred up a lot of people out there. I think some of it is genuine. I think there are people now who are frustrated. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about their jobs. But in today's world, the world of the internet, when one person is frustrated, another person who shares that frustration soon finds out about it, and they connect up. And then when you have these radio talk show hosts who fan the flames of these things, you have these instant firestorms of protests that blow up, as this one has blown up.
Meanwhile, Bob, let's talk about the health care debate, because Mr. Obama plans to address a joint session of Congress next week talking about health care. How big is next week for the president?
Oh, I think this is extremely important. The first thing the president has got to do is be specific. He's got to tell members of Congress which parts of this he really wants, and he's going to stay with them on it until the end. No member of Congress wants to vote for something not knowing if the president is going to be with him at the end of the day when all of the compromises have taken place, especially it involves something like a tax increase. But the other part of this is that if this speech falls flat, I think it's going to really hurt the president. His polls have been going down all summer. This would be a big defeat for him, and I think it would take him some time to recover. I think we're seeing here what may be the biggest week of this presidency coming.
All right, our chief Washington correspondent and host of Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer. Bob, thank you very much. On Face the Nation this Sunday, Bob will speak with Education Secretary Arne Duncan about the controversy over the president's speech to school children. Now, the Obama administration today reversed a long-standing government policy saying it will release the names of nearly everyone who visits the White House. Exceptions will be made for national security, confidential visitors such as potential Supreme Court nominees, and purely personal guests. Mr. Obama said he's making good on his pledge to make his administration the most transparent in history. We turn now to those wildfires north of Los Angeles. Police have now launched a homicide investigation looking for an arsonist believed to have set that deadly blaze. And today, firefighters stood at attention there to honor two colleagues who were killed Sunday when their truck plunged off a mountain road. That fire has destroyed 64 homes and scorched more than 200 square miles. It is now about 40% contained. In Washington state, the FBI is investigating a suspected case of eco-terrorism. Overnight, someone used a backhoe to knock down two radio towers. A banner left nearby bore the initials of a radical environmental group, the Earth Liberation Front. In an email, the group said it was protecting the ecosystem from, quote, harmful radio waves. The station KRKO is back on the air using backup equipment. Up next on the CBS Evening News tonight, he is a presidential advisor who insulted Republicans, but that is not the only reason he has conservatives up in arms. Chances are that until this week, you'd never heard the name Van Jones. He's a presidential advisor who suddenly finds himself in the middle of an uproar over what he said about Republicans and his views on 9/11. Now, some in the GOP say it's time for Jones to resign. Here's senior White House correspondent Bill Plant.
Mr. Vice President.
Van Jones is a White House advisor for environmentally friendly jobs. But provocative statements he made before he joined the administration have sparked conservative outrage. In a speech last year, Jones joked about what he called President Bush's addiction to oil.
I hope I don't offend anybody, but the President of the United States sounded like a crackhead when he said that. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit. Like a crackhead trying to lick the crack pipe for a fix.
Jones's take-no-prisoners rhetoric is now ricocheting around the internet. In this meeting from February, just before he joined the White House team, Jones responded to an audience question about why Democrats were not as successful as Republicans.
Well, the answer to that is they're assholes. Barack Obama's not an asshole. So some of us who are not Barack Hussein Obama are going to have to start getting a little bit uppity.
Jones has long been an outspoken advocate for liberal causes, lashing out in 2007 against unequal justice for African Americans.
You don't have to call somebody the N-word if you can call them a felon.
What's prompted the most outrage is Jones's signature on the 2004 petition of a so-called 9/11 Truth Organization, calling for immediate inquiry into evidence that suggests high-level government officials may have deliberately allowed the September 11th attacks to occur. In a statement issued by the White House, Jones said, "If I have offended anyone with statements I made in the past, I apologize. As for the petition, I do not agree with this statement, and it certainly does not reflect my views now or ever." Friends say Jones told them he had not read the petition before he signed it. But angry conservatives say remarks made last month by White House senior advisor Valerie Jarrett suggest that the White House was very familiar with Jones's activism.
Van Jones, we were so delighted to be able to recruit him into the White House. We've been watching him really he's not that old, but for as long as he's been active out in Oakland and all of the ways that he has, the creative ideas that he has. And so now we have captured that.
White House spokesman Robert Gibbs today would say only that Jones continues to work at the White House, not exactly a full embrace. But it is classic Washington speak for, let's see how this all plays out. Bill Plant, CBS News, the White House.
The Obama administration is reportedly thinking about revamping the way it calculates poverty among the elderly, which might sharply change the picture. Current figures show that about 1 in 10 Americans over 65 are living in poverty. But an alternate formula created by the National Academy of Sciences puts the poverty rate at 18.6%, nearly twice as high. The current official rate is based on a 1955 formula that doesn't include rising medical costs and other factors. Up ahead here, Marines moved to tears during a battlefield memorial for one of their own. In medical news tonight, a second vaccine to fight HPV is a step closer to being approved. That virus is the leading cause of cervical cancer. The FDA said today that GlaxoSmithKline's vaccine Cervarix largely blocks 2 top strains of the virus. If it gets the okay, it would compete with Merck's Gardasil. In other news, a federal appeals court ruled today that former Attorney General John Ashcroft can be sued by a U.S. citizen who was detained under the Bush administration's anti-terror policies. Former University of Idaho student Abdullah Al-Kid was jailed for 2 weeks in 2003, but never charged. He says Ashcroft violated his constitutional rights. We'd like to take a moment now to go back to Afghanistan. 808 Americans have died in nearly 8 years of war there, and it can seem all too distant for those at home, but it never is for those on the battlefield. A news crew was traveling with a Marine unit when it was caught in a Taliban ambush near Dahana 3 weeks ago. 30 seconds into it, Lance Corporal Joshua Bernard went down, struck in the legs by a rocket-propelled grenade. As tracer rounds streaked the sky, fellow Marines hauled Bernard into an armored vehicle. They hoped to save his life, but a blood clot reached his heart. He died on the operating table. Nearly 2 weeks later, fellow Marines paused at their base to honor Bernie, just 21 years old, a devout Christian from Maine and a veteran of Iraq. A fallen hero. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, Assignment America, where the boy who found new parents over the internet is calling home now. Finally tonight, an update on one of Steve Hartman's most memorable stories. It's about a brilliant boy who refused to fall through the cracks. Here's tonight's Assignment America.
There are a lot of good families in Rochester Hills, Michigan. But all Alex needed was just one.
I'm sure you've never received a letter of this nature before, and I'm also quite sure you'll be surprised, albeit unpleasantly, at the circumstances under which I'm writing this letter.
Alex Shevescu was a student, perhaps the smartest student at Stony Creek High School. His SAT scores were near perfect.
He's a very bright young man.
Colette Judge was his counselor.
When things were crazy at home, he could focus on school, and that made it better for him.
I suppose this is where I should delve into a brief summary of my life. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and I have not heard from my father since. My mother was a nurturing and loving person, to which I credit my early start on the path of academics.
In fact, his mom was getting her PhD in computer science when one day she got in a car crash and suffered a head injury. Alex says it changed her.
Night and day.
Not physically, just mentally.
She would become abusive and neglectful.
Through most of grade school and into high school, Alex bounced back and forth between foster care and living with his mother, who every time promised to do better, but never did.
Which goes into why the last time I was removed from her custody, I pushed for her rights to be terminated. Not because I didn't love her, but because had I not, I would have been placed back with her, and the circus would have gone on.
That's how Alex ended up here, at the Children's Home of Detroit. It's an orphanage, but more importantly, it's in a whole different school district than Stony Creek. And Alex says he didn't leave his mother just to lose the only real home he ever knew.
My school means everything to me. When chaos reigned at home, I immersed myself in my studies and my friends.
Unfortunately, it's nearly impossible to find any foster home for a 17-year-old boy. Plus, his social worker at the time wasn't even trying anyway.
Nobody was advocating for him, so he had to advocate for himself.
I searched, pulled up, court records, and I started looking up foster care listings.
He compiled a list of a couple dozen prospective parents and wrote the most important letter of his life.
Now I ask you to consider fostering me. Thank you, Alex Chevescu.
It was a shot in the dark, but
it worked.
Last year, empty nesters Jim and Suzanne Banty took Alex into their home and hearts.
We've grown to love him.
Really?
Yeah, he's a member of the family. We hope he chooses to stay there.
Alex did stay. He spent his entire senior year with the Bantys. In fact, the only reason he moved out is because, well, Harvard is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He started this week and already seems well on his way to finding a new school family. Alex is majoring in economics, although he's not exactly sure what he wants to be when he grows up. Other than a foster parent, of course. Steve Hartman, CBS News, Rochester Hills, Michigan.
That is the CBS Evening News tonight. For Katie Couric, I'm Jeff Glor. Thanks for watching. I'll see you back here tomorrow night on the Saturday Evening News. Good night.